because the government paid for most of my education. So I think the opportunities are extraordinary, but the commitment to own a business and own a practice is a huge undertaking. And so what I'm seeing is burnout of young veterinarians more than I'm seeing opening a new practice, because they just have too many things on the plate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Tanella. I'm chair of Mandelbaum Barrett's National Veterinary Law Group, and I'm honored to be here today with my good friend, Dr. Jim Wilson. Jim, good to see you.
Hey, thank you, Peter.
Jim, thanks for joining me today. I was talking with you earlier, and I said, I've had a lot of guests come on my show, but nobody yet to come on with, a DVM and a JD. You are my first, so you're the first there with that one.
Well, thank you very much, because it's been a long career, and I cannot tell you how much I've used both degrees.
Right. So
Unbelievable.
Jim, I was, when I was getting ready to talk with you, and I was looking back at some of my notes, and I've been fortunate to know you, I think it's close to over 15 years now.
Wow.
You've impacted thousands of lives, just DVMs alone. And I think of somebody like me, who's not a DVM, but another professional who was looking to come into the industry, and you welcomed me with open arms. When you hear about, or you look back in your career and you hear about all the lives, veterinary and non-veterinary, that you've impacted, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
It's kind of an odd feeling, because I don't think about it often, but when I do, I think about the fact that I probably taught more veterinary students than anybody else ever, because over the 18 years or so, when I was teaching at anywhere from 10 to 18 schools per year for 2 days or maybe 4 days, the total came out to be something like 35,000, and many of them have no recollection of me, and others keep calling me 25 years after they were one of my students.
Wow. And if you recall, I remember when I reached out to you, and you were like one of the first people I reached out to in the profession. I say, Dr. Wilson, I introduced myself. I'm really interested in getting into the profession. You were like, well, come on down and meet with me. Let's talk. Drive down to your office down in Yardley, PA. We had a great meeting. And again, you welcomed me with open arms. And then, you were kind enough to take me over to UPenn, and you let me observe, teach one of your classes.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's just it's made a lasting impression on me. And then our relationship just took off, like so many others you've had over the years. What made you? You think about it. I always ask the guests, why did you pursue a career in veterinary medicine? And so many of my clients and guests have very similar stories. So with you, what made you pursue a career in veterinary medicine, but then on top of it, pivot and say, let me go get a law degree on top, in addition to a DVM? What made you think about that?
It's funny that you think back, and what was it? When I was for my first 12 years of my life, I lived in the suburbs, the outskirts of a small Wisconsin city, Shawano, Wisconsin. And then my parents had 4 boys and a girl, and they said, my God, there's no place to raise a family better than on a farm. So we then moved to a farm where I became really involved in 4-H, learned a tremendous amount of skills from 4-H, and we raised sheep. I had horses, we had chickens, and I really loved being outdoors, and I thought I was going to be a large animal practitioner, because this is back in the late 50s and early 60s, and they were still sort of the cream of the veterinary profession. So that was the easy thing. The easy decision was to go to veterinary school, because it just fit what I wanted to do. I was a good student,
Hmm.
loved learning to boot. And so then I graduated from Iowa State University in 1967. And I knew I was going to be drafted because if you were single in those days, Vietnam War days, and you were single in the Midwest especially, you were going to be drafted. So I was prepared for that, and I had an application all set to enlist in the Air Force because I thought there'd be more interesting opportunities there. So sure enough, 2 months, 3 months after I graduated, I got my draft notice, and I immediately responded, "Hey, I'm sorry, I've already applied for a commission in the Air Force." And so the Air Force was a fascinating a little over 2 years of my life, because once again you learn all about public health. You become the public health expert on a base. And then I was lucky enough to be shipped to Germany instead of Vietnam. And
Huh.
so living in Germany for 2 years just completely opened my eyes back in 1968 that the sun did not rise and set over Wisconsin.
Right.
It did not rise and set over the USA.
Right.
That there was a mammoth world out there beyond. I looked at the metric system and said, how stupid can we be in the United States not to be on the metric system? And so it was a total education in addition to being the base veterinarian. So I knew I loved learning, and I thought I wanted to use the GI Bill back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I kept thinking about getting an MBA. And my best friend on the base, Air Force Base, was a surgeon from UCLA. And he had some friends from Southern California. They came to visit him. We sat around drinking wine, and one of the guys was an attorney. And he said, "Hey, Jim, what you gonna do after you finish up here?" And I said, "Well, I think I'll get an MBA." He said, "Have you ever thought about going to law school?" "Not really." He said, "Why don't you? If you went to law school, you'd probably be the first veterinary lawyer in the USA." And I thought, that's just the kind of stuff I love. so, so it was a challenge, okay,
Right.
to study for the LSAT exam and get a score high enough to get in. And so what it really boiled down to was a perpetual curiosity for always learning more than I knew the day before.
Hmm.
And then I also wanted to find a way I could change careers every 5 to 10 years and move in every possible direction. So I was lucky enough to get into UCLA and have incredible education, worked my tail off. If I'd have worked that hard in vet school, I'd have been the #1 student. But I was competing with all these, oh my God, these English majors and these philosophy majors and all these people who could write. It
Right.
was like, oh God, this is so different. It's a full essay exam as opposed to multiple choice and short answer. But oh my God, it just changed my life forever between living in Europe and going to law school and opening doors and opening ideas. It was just one of those things that perpetually allowed me to figure out a way to keep changing myself and the world.
But and that's a remarkable story. And I remember you telling me about it. I forgot the details, and I actually, as being a father of 3 young adult women myself, and my oldest daughter is very interested in going to Europe at some point in time during her college career, which I'm very much in favor of. And hearing how that opened your eyes to a whole nother world makes me feel even better her doing that. You alluded to having a different career every 5 years, and you're like an onion. I keep peeling you back and all the different things that you've done. Is there anything in particular that was a challenge for you, or kind of jumped out at you in your career, or you just enjoyed? Now, you were juggling a multitude of careers. I mean, you
Yeah,
taught,
it's
you
true.
owned a
Yeah.
practice, you have a consulting business. You've been a successful writer. You wrote several books on veterinary medicine and ethics, law, and jurisprudence. Is it just that perpetual eagerness for learning and knowledge?
Yeah, it was fascinating because I loved veterinary medicine. I really enjoyed veterinary medicine, and then I got into emergency medicine back and opened up the fifth privately owned veterinary emergency hospital in the United States,
Hmm.
in Southern California, with 26 other veterinarians as my board of directors. And so I really very early on, this is 1967, 1976, 74, and it decided that that was a new challenge. And then decided that after we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area a few years later, the Dean Pritchard, the second or first veterinary lawyer in America, happened to be there, and he knew I had a law degree because I had been conferring with him. And
Right.
he invited me to come up and teach one class in his law and ethics course. And I worked 10 hours to teach one class or whatever the case for 1 hour. And I decided I really loved it. And then the next year, he had me teach 6 of the classes. The next year, he had me teach 10. And then the next year, we made it a 2-credit course.
Hmm.
And he turned
All
it
while you're
over to
still,
me.
all
So,
still while you're practicing medicine.
yeah,
You're still
yeah,
working. You're
yeah,
doing it on the side. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So what that did, though, it gave me this link to an academic center as an adjunct professor. So not only was I a practicing veterinarian at that point as a practice owner, about an
Hmm.
hour away from UC Davis. So what I learned was every friggin' day there was a legal question that came up in practice that I didn't know the answer to. And so very quickly I could see how the law and veterinary medicine overlapped because I knew the law from school. And I saw the application on a day-to-day basis, everything from animal cruelty cases to animal nuisance laws to the FDA extra label use of drugs. So many things were sort of overlapping between those two professions, but nobody was really tying them together. And because of my really good friendships at UC Davis with the key faculty people, I was told by one of them, Jim, if you ever want to really be the most looked for veterinarian in your profession, you got to write a book. And so his prompting is what led me to do 2,000 hours worth of work to write the law and ethics book for the profession. And what I also learned once you start teaching is unless you are challenged to find all the appropriate references, you really don't know what the hell you're doing. Because before I wrote the book, what I was teaching was sometimes completely wrong because it was, just sort of the general knowledge.
Right.
So then we did some clinical studies for clavamox in our veterinary practice in California, the one I was a half owner. So all those challenges of new drugs and clinical studies and the law and ethics and books and writing and then speaking and then using the degrees synchronously just was what turned me on.
I got a zinger for you. So you mentioned the entanglement between the law and veterinary medicine, and so what are your thoughts on the FTC ruling that just came out yesterday, banning non-competition agreements? You have any thoughts on that?
I'd heard this was in the works. I'd heard this was
Right.
in the works for the last couple of years. I kept thinking this would be a blockbuster, monumental
Hmm.
impact on our profession. The amazing thing is there have been 5 states forever
Right.
and more now that ban the enforceability of these non-competes, and the veterinarians did just fine.
Right.
But then you see the corporate consolidators taking this massive impact on our profession by employing, I don't know, 60% of all the specialists or whatever it is by now or whatever. All of them have these god-awful non-competes. And if this were freed up, that these were unenforceable, not only would it affect private practitioners who are bringing in and mentoring their young doctors only to watch them go across the street and open a practice,
Right.
I see it having an incredibly potentially dangerous effect on all the corporate consolidators, who then will lose even more people than they do now with competition. And of course, that's the whole goal behind it. Is
Right.
one of the reasons California's always been so freaking competitive is because these non-competes are never enforceable out there.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting what's going to happen. I know in our office, we're looking at it closely and anticipating some type of challenge. And I'm curious to see if a challenge comes forward, whether or not they'll seek some type of an injunction of enforcement, and then see if there's some type of exceptions to the rule that get made. But it's an interesting time. It's already been an interesting time over these last 4 or 5 years, and this is just almost like the icing on the cake now. What's going to happen going forward for all the reasons and so much more you just talked about.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has already filed a lawsuit today, and they're filing for an injunction. And I expect they'll get an injunction. Our American Vet Med Law Association members have been kind of dinging back and forth on this, and I'm sure there'll be an injunction. And the important thing is that the protection for sales of practices is unaffected by this.
Right,
because,
of course.
And then the second thing is it never talked about non-solicitation of clients and non-solicitation of staff kinds of issues. And so those 5 states that traditionally did not enforce non-competes did have language enforcing non-solicitation. Now that's pretty hard to prove. It's a lot harder to prove than a non-compete when somebody's obviously breaching a contract.
Where do you see you have thoughts? I know, Stan. I say you have thoughts, and that's a silly thing to ask you because I know you have a lot of thoughts. Where do you see the veterinary profession going over the next 5 years? I mean, there's been such a transition, and you mentioned corporate consolidation, which we've all seen the last 5 years, and now with a kind of almost like a readjustment occurring, somewhat of last year and more of this year. What's your thoughts on where you see the profession going over the next 5 years? Any ideas?
I really don't know. This much I do know, that the opportunities to start practices and compete with the corporate consolidators are incredibly good. There are a lot of practices that the minute the corporate consolidator comes into the area and changes the culture with no stakeholder in the practice, clients fairly quickly see the lack of continuity of the doctors, and they go back to the private practitioners that are there. So there are really going to be some tremendous opportunities for entrepreneurial veterinarians to take that challenge to go start a new veterinary practice. The most difficult part of today versus 50 years ago is that 85% or thereabouts, or 80% are women, and they've got so many more responsibilities. It takes almost 10 years to 12 years post-graduation before those who've had children feel ready to start a practice. And so that, coupled with educational debt that didn't exist like it does today when I graduated, because the government paid for most of my education. So I think the opportunities are extraordinary, but the commitment to own a business and own a practice is a huge undertaking. And so what I'm seeing is burnout of young veterinarians more than I'm seeing opening a new practice, because they just have too many things on the plate.
Yeah. I burn out, and that's a great point. I think during when COVID, that was probably one of the number one issues I heard from our clients. Why are you selling it? Just they were exhausted. The demand was so great, they couldn't keep up with the demand. But you're right. I think there's a great opportunity for independent veterinarians going forward. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and it's great. That's just great for the profession.
That's the profession we all grew to love. And it's why most of us went to veterinary school, not to have fees become so astronomical that we feel guilty about even bringing up the fees,
Right.
$5,000 to $10,000 for almost anything in an emergency hospital that lands in a specialty center. And it's like, oh my goodness. So I don't know if we'll never go back to the good old days by the way it was when James Herriot was sort
Right.
of the driver of applications for veterinary school. Nor will we go back to the days when most of us were farm kids who were more than happy to work 50 to 60 hours a week because that's what we did.
Yeah.
And
I don't
so
see that happening. That's for sure. Right.
that'll never happen. Life balance is so critical. Most of them can't work more than 36 hours a week
Right.
without burning out the way it is now. So it's a different world. And the pressures are so much different. The human animal bond is such a powerful instrument these days of familial, of one health families, that it's just the perfect. And I guess the one thing I'd have to say to people: be ready for change.
Hmm.
Be ready to embrace change, because if you're not going to be willing to embrace change going forward, you're going to be obsolete in 5 years.
Jim, is there ever going to come a day when you're, say, no, Jim Wilson is fully retired? I was again looking in the semi-retired Jim Wilson. I mean, do you ever see yourself as being fully retired at some point in time? I mean, what do you have your hands in these days? What are you doing? What occupies your days?
Oh my God. My brother
I don't
and
know if I have enough time here to get an answer to that. Give me the short version.
The short version is my brother and I started a company that deals with sustainable products to close boxes and hold them open without the use of tape. And we now have international business in 7 different countries. We are probably 35 to 40 hours a week is involved in developing marketing and ideas to grow a product that has very little competition, but it changes the whole paradigm about how people close and open boxes without thinking about knives to open them and tape to close them, and allows for reuse, and the convenience factor is immense. So I'll probably retire probably when I die.
Right. Are those boxes that's how you ship your pets? Is that what they're made for?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. That's great. And when you told me about that venture, it's what a great idea. And it's a whole completely something just like you've been doing your whole career, something completely new.
Completely new and different.
Right.
And I would like to say, if any of your people who hear this would like to know what it's all about, go to boxlatch.com and go to YouTube Boxlatch, and you will see how different my world is today from the days when I was teaching all over the country and writing books.
I'm glad you said that, Jim. So boxlatch.com. I love it.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to thank you for being my guest. And more importantly, I want to thank you just for being my friend. And again, 15 years ago, opening up your arms to me it's just, it's been a great career so far. And a lot of that has to do with you. And I appreciate that, my friend. Thank you.
One of my last comments is I really appreciate the lawyers in this country who have focused on veterinary transaction law, because it's such a specialty area that's involved, and you're one of those people who really has been fostering that as well. So thank you, and all the other attorneys who looked at this as an opportunity that we needed for a lot of assistance.
Thanks again, Jim. Great seeing you.
Thank you.